Good evening and welcome to Poems On. This is the 10th episode of the third season. And once again, we're coming back to Rhina Espaillat and Alfred Nicole, following up on our last conversation where we chose favorite poems from our own work. This time, the theme is favorites by other poets. And this could be for any reason that we favor them, but these are going to be some very personal choices. So, good evening, you two. Wonderful to see you as always. And if Rhina will start us off, I think I will feel honored.
Well, thank you. I feel honored to be here reading on your beautiful show altogether. This is a poem by Toni Treadway. She's a living poet. I'm very glad to say that. She is one of the Powow River Poets, and she should be better known than she is so far, and I think someday she will be. This is called The Hatchling on Ward 4. And a hatchling, of course, is a helpless little bird, doesn't know how to stay alive, doesn't quite know what to do next, and so forth. It's the baby bird. But this baby is a father. It's her father. And what I loved about this poem from the very first reading is the fact that it shows how sometimes roles rotate. My father's, for instance, my sons, for instance, right now, sometimes yell at me when I don't do what they say because they become my fathers.
Yes.
And that's as it should be because I had my turn at being their mother. So here she is looking at her father in Ward 4, the hatchling on Ward 4. My father sat alone, unhinged, not warm, with bulging eyes and skinny, sunken breast. He'd morphed into the hatchling's ancient form, like those he'd fed diced worms to in their nest. His look and piteous chirp echoed the need of chick for mother bird, and so I mashed up stew and meds and applesauce as feed. I smoothed his brow at sundown when he thrashed. I told him stories, pointed to the sky, reflecting on his lifelong love of birds, to urge him from his fear of death, to fly, to launch him homeward with familiar words.
I've never heard that poem, Tony.
What do you think of it?
I think it's quite wonderful.
Yeah, I like it too, and I had not heard it. And Toni, I know that you've had a great influence on Toni because am I wrong in saying that she's come to poetry relatively late?
Well, I suspect that she's one of those people who came to poetry relatively early, but was a little bit afraid because only real poets do that. And I remember being there myself.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm very moved by so much of what she writes, because sometimes it's almost as if you had to remove the hands from her mouth to get her to say it.
Mhm.
And it's a very wonderful poem. I agree with Alfred on that, but it had to come out with pain. And I
Yeah.
think the pain of poems like this are half of their value because they're universal. They become universal.
Yes. Well, and the other thing about Toni is she's not her work is not superficial. It comes from in there, deep in there.
Far in there.
I think of her poems about her brother, for example.
Yeah, that's what I was talking to Rena on my way here from her house about that poem about her brother. That's my favorite of all of her poems.
Well, I have
It
some
was
among her poems.
well. Now I wish I had the one that you just read on, on the page to consult. But yeah, thank you for reading that. I feel a little odd that we're talking about Toni and she's not with us. But I guess that licenses us to say anything we can't embarrass her with praise if she's not here.
We'll have to play it back for her so that she can be embarrassed.
Well, we can warn her where to go and what she'll hear.
I love I love the physical nature of this poem. That's the other thing, that she is not she doesn't use language for everything. She uses things for a lot of
Mm,
things. And I love the use of things, and I love language when it becomes thingy. And she does that. She has, for example, he morphed into the hatchling's ancient form, or like those he'd fed diced worms to in their nest. And
yes.
see him cutting up the worms and putting them into the nest for the birds. And then I mashed up stew and meds and apple seed as feed, applesauce as feed. And then even the touching of the body, I smoothed his brow as sundown when he thrashed. And the
Mm,
way a sick person thrashes out of restlessness and out of boredom and out of just being sick of being sick. So she makes you see what's happening. She doesn't make you just feel it.
mm, mm.
Yeah, and what I like very much is she brings in he's going to be the hatchling. And that would have been a decent metaphor because he's morphing into that form. But then she says, like those he'd fed diced worms to in the nest. So in other words, he had a relationship with these
Yeah,
he raised chickens himself.
Yes.
Oh, it's yeah. That was a that turn, the one that you just read, that's an amazing turn right
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really to launch him homeward with familiar words.
Mm,
So,
mm.
And
Wow.
homeward up.
Boy, well, thanks. You promised to bring work by poets whom you felt should be better appreciated. And
yes.
that's a great choice to start.
I think it's a pity that we always applaud the dead. You
Well,
know,
yeah.
so many of the living could use a little applause.
We're just trying not to embarrass anybody.
Oh, come on. Let's embarrass everybody.
I suppose there are people who really shy away from uh, sincere praise, but surely part of them it accepts while the rest of them quails at the moment. You know what I mean?
Yes, I know what you mean. And I think what we really quail at is the lists, you know. He was published here and there and there and there and also there, and he won this and that prize and also the other and the other. That I really have no patience for because what I'm interested in is the work, is the poetry.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the superficiality of the audience is not just there for the poetry audience. I can tell you that. having
You
having dealt
stand
with
before a lot more audiences than we do.
well other kinds of audiences who you know at least if it's a poetry audience, you know they're listening to the words because that's what there is to listen to.
Yeah.
When it's a musical audience, there are a lot of people that don't listen to words at all. Well, they just listen to what the words sound like,
Hmm.
Well, yeah.
which is not a bad thing unless it's all you're doing. So,
Well, it's the other half of a double art because these two arts were born together, you know. And,
yes,
and I think that they do stick together very well. It's like the melodies that we do.
yes,
The poems are wonderful to do, and the music, of course, is deathless. Music is forever.
yep.
But I think when they work together, they gain something.
Yeah, I think that's true. Um, well, obviously, I spent a lot of my time doing one thing or the other, so you're preaching to the choir. Shall we move to
Okay.
our second guest, please?
I'm going to start with a poem by R.S. Thomas. I think that the Thomases have a, they have, there's so many great poets named Thomas. There's Dylan Thomas, there's Edward Thomas. We've got Sally Thomas around now. But this, of all of those wonderful poets, this one's my favorite. And I could have taken any number of poems by him, but this is the one I chose. It's called The One Furrow. When I was young, I went to school with pencil and foot rule, sponge and slate, and sat on a tall stool at learning's gate. When I was older, the gate swung wide. Clever and keen-eyed, in I pressed, but found in the mind's pride no peace, no rest. Then who was it taught me back to go to cattle and barrow, field and plow, to keep to the one furrow, as I do now?
Mm. Is this Thomas the Frost's friend?
No, that's Edward. This
Okay.
this was a Welsh poet. I don't really know that much about him. I know that he was a minister to a bunch of people who weren't entirely interested in listening to what a minister had to say. But and he knows it too, and it always shows up in his poems. And he's very much accepts that. So he lives with rural farming people, and he's one of them. And he writes these rather lovely poems.
Is he a contemporary? Is he a living poet?
Oh, no, he died, I think, in 83. I'm guessing there, but at least I'm in the ballpark there.
So 20th century.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. I had not heard of him previously.
I never heard the name either.
Yeah, I mean, that poem could have been written at almost any time.
Even now.
Yes.
Yeah. Except that no one brings sponge and slate to school anymore, I don't
Well,
think.
I guess that's true. But when I heard that, if I had been asked to guess, I would have guessed earlier
Mhm.
than what you're telling me his dates actually were. Sponge and slate I equate with what?
19th, maybe?
Yes. Yeah, most likely. How did you find this poet?
How did I find this poet? Don't know, but I'll tell you. I've spoken to you before about my famous, to me, um,
Yes.
uh, personal anthology. And of all the poets in that anthology, one of the top three is Rhina's poems. I mean, if you count keeping score, David
Yes.
Ferry, David
Yeah.
Ferry's right there.
Yep.
He's just under that. He's I think he ranks fourth or fifth in my book, which has about 505 pages at this point.
So is this because he was very prolific or he had a very high batting average for in terms of his
High,
poems and your
high batting
taste?
average, a really high batting. It's a little bit like Larkin. You know, it's
Okay.
not all that prolific, but so many
Mhm.
fine poems.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued with how we find the people that we're choosing, um, because in the case of Tony, we know Tony, um, but that's why I asked where you first encountered this particular
Mm.
Thomas.
I just don't really remember how I first came upon him, but he's actually getting. You see him a little bit online, ironically nowadays, because people who are concerned about AI or about AI kind of taking things over. They
Yes.
look to him because he wrote poems against what he called the machine.
Good for
Oh,
him.
So
it's
there are poems.
a different
There are,
machine, but yes, still a machine.
He is same machine.
Yeah, it really is. I love the pattern of the short line and the long line, and the rhyme scheme is it's very casual. It's as if he were inventing it as he went along. It
Hmm.
doesn't feel measured at all. It feels spoken.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Hmm.
Learning's gate is a lovely phrase.
Yes.
Learning as a place that you have to enter through. You have to enter through a certain gate in order to achieve it.
Yeah, and then he said keen-eyed. He was keen-eyed, and when he was a little older, the gate swung wide,
Yeah.
and clever and
In I
keen-eyed,
press.
in eye pressed. Here I come. I'm gonna grab the whole batch of it. You know, it's like trying to read the entire
Yeah,
encyclopedia when you're a
that's
kid.
right.
Did you ever try to do that?
Of course.
Did you try to read the encyclopedia when you were a kid?
I think I started with the dictionary,
Oh, well,
but
that's better. That's actually better.
Take you a week or two.
But the only thing is the darn encyclopedia I was trying to read was one of those ones that you got for, you went to the grocery store
yeah, you got
and
it one volume a week, or
yeah, yeah,
yes.
yeah.
One of my mother's customers had grown-up boys, and she said, "My boys are not using this anymore." And she said to my mother, I think your daughter would enjoy it." And I did. I wanted to eat the whole thing. I didn't succeed, of course,
Yeah.
but it
What
was great fun.
do you remember what encyclopedia it was?
It had something with the word youth in it, a encyclopedia for American youth or something like that.
Ah,
Mm.
I asked because we had a big powwow, excuse the pun, in my family at the point of buying an encyclopedia to have in the home between the Britannica and the Americana, because I had showed some level of interest. I was very interested in reading, and my parents wanted to encourage me, and so we had quite a number of skull sessions trying to figure out. We eventually ended up with the Encyclopedia Americana, and yeah, I tried to make my way through that. But I also started with the Book of Knowledge, which came with it, and I couldn't resist a book called the Book of Knowledge.
No, of course not.
All I gotta do is read this and I'm gonna be Thomas Aquinas. I'll know the whole darn thing.
And it's interesting how he's kind of blaming himself. In I pressed, but found in the mind's pride no peace, no rest.
Yes,
He discovered that learning can be difficult, not because you're having difficulty doing it, but because once you've learned, what do you do with that learning?
yes,
How do you deal with it?
yeah, and the value, at least for me, the value that I placed on knowledge when I was a child and growing up was very high. And the value that I place on it now is not so much lower than it was as it's been overtaken by the value I place on some other things. In other words, knowing is not the end of it. It may not even make much difference. There are other things more important. And I didn't think of that when I was 12. So,
Well, one of the poems I almost chose of yours for tonight had to do with that learning that you did with the children, with the kids that they felt that they were not doing enough, and that was perfect. That was quite perfect. I
now I'm not
may
sure. I don't know which one you mean now. That's interesting.
I may end up reading that one.
Well, it could be about it could be about my students because I've got a bunch about my students. But
Yes, that's right.
well, this is it's a leisurely stroll we're taking, but let me move it along. Um, in my case, I'm going to read a Frost poem that's maybe not as well known as the ones that have been anthologized ad nauseum, but it is remarkable. And I'll tell you after I've read it why this particular one appeals to me as much as it does. It's called The Silken Tent.
Ah,
Let me hang on a moment here.
It's a beauty.
She is, as in a field, a silken tent at midday, when the sunny summer breeze has dried the dew and all its ropes relent, so that in guise it gently sways at ease. In its supporting central cedar pole, that is its pinnacle to heavenward and signifies the sureness of the soul, seems to owe naught to any single cord, but strictly held by none, is loosely bound by countless silken ties of love and thought to everything on earth the compass round, and only by one's going slightly taught in the capriciousness of summer air is of the slightest bondage made aware.
Yeah, you know, the thing about that poem is that it's so technically perfect.
Yes.
It's such a tour de force, technically. But sometimes I step back from that poem and try to imagine the woman he's describing.
Yeah,
And you know, and it doesn't help to know, to have a little of the biography in your head. I think it's the woman, it's not his, it's the woman that he had after his wife died. The one that he kind of quarreled with Laura and with his biographer about. And
oh,
she's in Cambridge. I'll bet you she's just so part of a community and has so many obligations, but she just meets them all with such grace that you can't feel it. He's just admiring how she can keep all of those balls up in the air and not feel trapped by it.
well, it's the way that you put it, reminds me that this poem, while it could be evidence of some kind of a romantic connection, doesn't have to be. That it could, in fact, have been inspired by something very different, uh, by a network of social contacts, and the way a person navigates within that network.
Absolutely.
To make it a duller metaphor.
No, but I think it is. I think that's going on. Some of
Yeah,
those, there might be more than one of those silken lines coming down um, that are romantic, but not all of them.
No,
right, right. Yeah.
it
Well,
doesn't feel like a love poem. It
no, it
doesn't.
doesn't.
It feels like a gratitude poem.
Because I think that at first that was a major part of his feeling toward her because he was at a loss,
Of course.
and she knew her way around in this world.
Right.
So you know his biography. I do not. I have not read a biography of Frost, although I would probably enjoy it, but I have not done that. Um,
Prophet reads them all.
well, it's sort of his book, it's his business to read them all. But
Yeah.
um, to me, it doesn't declare itself particularly as a sonnet, but it is.
What a sonnet. It's one sentence. The whole
Yes.
thing is one sentence. The only divisions in it are semicolons. I don't think there are any dashes in it, but there are semicolons and there are colons and that kind of thing, but not a period anywhere.
Right.
And that is an imitation of what she does. What she does is not break here and then continue here. What she does is to go from here to here to here to there. And everything that she touches quietly and
Yeah.
without stress. And that sounds like a perfect caretaker to me.
Well, I'm looking at it as you speak, and there is not a semicolon. It's all commas, but in a sense, every comma is like a little connecting line
Yeah.
that gets you from one phrase to the next. So the structure of it, in other words, the punctuation is all similar and equal, in a way that that these guy lines are
Yeah.
holding the tent. So it's got this kind of structural identity. It repays close attention in so many ways. And anyway, the
Can I
reason,
ask you to do something?
sure.
Can you read lines 8 and 9 of that
Let
poem?
me find it. 1, 2, 3,
Even if
4.
even if it means just dive, I just want to see what happens right there between the octet and the sestet.
I got you. Actually, I'll do 7, 8,
Yeah,
and then into 9.
yeah.
And signifies the sureness of the soul. That's referring to the central cedar pole.
Yeah.
Seems to owe naught to any single cord, but strictly held by none, is loosely bound by countless silken ties of love and thought to everything on earth the compass round. So it hinges on but.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Seems to owe not to any single cord is the end of line 8, but strictly held by none is loosely bound. And there is no stanza break. It's a chunk.
Yeah, but imagine that if there was a period after line 8 and the poem stopped right there, you would have simply isolated her.
Yes.
But then the but connects her to everything the compass round.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's love and thought. It's love and thought. Two things that are more giving than taking.
Yes. Well, as I say, I didn't know his biography, so your introduction of the figure of this woman that he knew after the death of his wife is interesting to me, and another reason why I really ought to get hopping on reading about particularly the latter part of his life. I mean, I knew a little bit about the earlier part of his life and his going to England to be published and not being published until he was 39, and some of the difficult things with the children. But
well, the English appreciated him. They took him very seriously.
Yeah, and he was grateful for that, right?
Yes, he was.
Interesting. Well, the reason I chose it, apart from all of the technical considerations, is that I wanted to have something by Frost because he was very important in my early development, because I identified very strongly with him as a New England poet, and that meant something to me, that he was a sort of native, and that he would be writing about New Hampshire or Vermont, and he was one of the first poets that I understood could have that as their identity in the modern world. I didn't know of any poets, I don't think, that were around. I was reading Shakespeare and other people, but he was a living figure. And as we all can remember, when he read at Kennedy's inauguration in 1960, it really underlined the idea, although it was not an idea for all time, as recent events have proven, that there was a place in the conscience of the nation for a poet to speak at the inauguration of a president. So that had an impact on me. I was only 12 at the time, but that led me to be interested in reading him. And I missed him by only a few weeks, because I went to Andover in the fall of 62, and he had read at Andover in the spring of 62. So I missed seeing him live by about 12 weeks. So
I'll tell you a surprise. He was not a New Englander at all.
I know, but
in California.
Yes, but I was not so concerned with facts when I was 12.
Or now.
Yeah, or now. That it often happens that people who come to be seen as the representatives of an area are not from that area.
That's right.
Yeah,
So
because they can see the area better than the people who grew up
yeah,
in it.
Yes.
yeah, it happens in music a lot, and actually, a lot of my friends, Rhode Island musicians, really made names for themselves in bands in Texas, and everybody thinks they're from Texas, but they're from Rhode Island. Nobody ever thinks that.
Well, it's Eastern Texas.
Yeah, right. It's on the coast. It's got a coast. That's what counts. Well, let's go round. This is nice. Let's go round again.
Okay. This is from Priscilla Turner Spada, who is another one of the Powows who never met her father. Her father went off to World War II, and he did not come back. And she writes a great deal about that because apparently the missing father is a very important figure in her life,
Hmm.
which is understandable. And she has a poem here called Just Them. It's a ghazal. And ghazals for me generally don't work. They tend to be repetitious, but the repetition, it doesn't earn its place. Here, I think this one completely earns its place. Just Them. The battered trunk is full of yesterdays. Letters, trinkets, photos, clues of yesterday. A young man in shirt sleeves, tie askew, carefully steps into a canoe yesterday. Beside him, a woman smiling in a summer dress, sepia-colored now, white-hued yesterday. Before the ships, the trips, the separations, the hastily arranged I-dos of yesterday. Just them. No cares, no taps, no flags, no graves, no clouds of war as yet in view yesterday.
Hmm. Hmm.
She does a lot with photographs, but she makes the photographs live.
Hmm. You mean she writes a lot as with photographs as a prompt, or
Well,
they're in the poems?
she may imagine them in the poem, or she may actually see them in the poem. But
Ah,
I think what happens is that she thinks in photographs.
ah.
Because that's the only way she ever saw him.
Yes, right.
Hmm. Which gives a different sense of reality to every other photograph,
Yes, that's
to
right.
photographs in general,
Photographs in general, yes.
because because there are photographs that carry the reality of her father to her as
Well,
nothing else
it's
does.
also the importance of something physical that comes up in a poem. If it's all feeling, if it's all descriptions of here's how I feel, I'm crazy about him, I never
Yeah,
forgotten him, I this and that, it becomes very empty. That's
sure.
just somebody telling you about X. But she doesn't tell you about X. She is presenting X to you in your inner eye. You can see it because she's describing it so well.
Hmm.
Talks about the sepia colored dress that was white yesterday. In other words, time has passed in the color of the dress.
Yes. Yeah. Well, every time yesterday recurs, it's differently contextualized.
Yes.
So it doesn't get repetitious because it's different every time.
Yeah. Right.
You know, there's a there's an anecdote that you'll see there is a connection. I'm not as crazy as it might appear initially, but there was a great anecdote about uh, about the great pianist Artur Rubinstein living in Paris in the 20s and going to visit Picasso in his studio, and he would see him he would go by re- regularly, and he went by over the course of a couple of weeks, and Picasso had a table with a bowl with some fruit on it, and he was doing still lifes, and every day it was another still life. And Rubinstein, after a couple of weeks, said, Pablo, I've been coming here for every day for 2 weeks, and it's always the same bowl with the same fruit. Why don't you paint something different? And he said Picasso got very uh, upset and said, "What are you talking about? Every day the light is different, the bowl is different, the fruit is different. I am different. None of it is the same." So to me, that's what today does. Every one of those todays is different.
Yes, that's right. That's right. It is. What is the passage of time? It's grief number one, isn't it? I mean, it's the one grief that we all share because the passage of time is what takes things away and what changes things. And the way she uses this yesterday, I think this is the best use of what is that name? The name
Guzzle.
of a guzzle that I've ever read. This is, I think, the most successful one, and it's only 5 couplets. That's all it is. But she's got a life there.
Wow.
Yeah. No, she's
I'd
very
like to see that. So you got this out of one of her books. Is that it?
good. Our book is called Light in Unopened Windows.
Lovely. Thank you.
Light in Unopened Windows. She's a
Yeah,
very
hold it up there. There you go, folks. Priscilla
Yeah.
Turner Spada.
Yeah.
Very, very good.
She's wonderful.
Yes, you're doing yeoman work. Alf?
All right, I'm going to read a poem by Anna Kamienska. Now, she is one of my all-time favorites, but she's been my all-time favorite, one of my all-time favorites for a very small time, because I was really only introduced to her probably around 2010. There's a well, even on my list of my favorite books of all time, there are a couple of books on that list that are never been published. One of them is the translation of Borges poems by Robert Metzi, and he had his helper, was it Dick? I forget the two of them. That's that beautiful book. It's a great book, but Borges' wife wouldn't allow it to be printed
No.
Oh, so how is it that you know it?
because she got it. She got hold
I
of
got
it.
it from Robert Mezzi,
Yeah.
a manuscript of his.
Oh,
And he has spent 14 years working on translations of this, and it's worth it. It's an absolute beauty. I'm sorry I didn't bring it to show.
but he's not being allowed to publish it.
No, he and his friend, I'm trying to remember the name of the friend now, but
Wow.
but it's a magnificent translation because Mezzi, may he rest in peace, was a very good translator and a very fine poet, very fine. Deserved more knowledge than people have of him too. I was very fond of him as a person and as a poet and as a translator certainly. But he had gotten praise on that manuscript, but from Richard Wilbur,
Yep.
Rost, all sorts of people who are very, very well known and very responsible when they give criticism. They had said, "This is fantastic. This ought to come out." He had sent a note to the widow, and she didn't even answer. Then he came to me and he said, "Well, you can write in Spanish. Write to her in Spanish and tell her that you believe that this book ought to be." So I did, and I did it as tactfully as possible. And sure enough, she didn't answer me. So
And,
Wow.
and many poets signed that piece
they
of
signed it.
and
Wow.
my role in this great uprising was that Tim Murphy was supposed to be one of the signatories, but he couldn't get there, so he had me forge his name. I forged him.
But you're admitting it now in semi-public form.
I didn't know
If
that.
only I had forged it better, we probably would have worked. But all right, well, the reason I say all of that is that another favorite book I have that was never published, as far as I know, are the journals of Anna Kamienska. And
Should I put this in?
yes, please. And because we're about to disappear if she doesn't plug that in.
Okay, here it is.
Yeah.
There.
But there were 3 issues of Poetry magazine that printed translations of her notebook and the translations were done by Claire Kavanaugh. So anyone who was interested, in June of 2010, in March of 2011, and May of 2012, Poetry published sections of her journals. And I don't think that they ever came out in a book because I've had my eye open ever since. My introduction to her.
I have those issues. I'm going to look them up.
And you can get them all free online too. The Poetry Foundation's free. You can just look it right up and you'll get it. But anyway, I'm going to read this one poem by her. Again, there's so many of her poems I could have just taken, and they're all so they're quiet poems really, and they don't draw any attention to themselves. So you just have to listen. Her name is Anna Kamienska, and this poem is called Small Things. It usually starts taking shape from one word, reveals itself in one smile, sometimes in the blue glint of eyeglasses, in a trampled daisy, in a splash of light on a path, in quivering carrot leaves, in a bunch of parsley. It comes from laundry hung on a balcony, from hands thrust into dough. It seeps through closed eyelids as through the prison wall of things, of objects, of faces, of landscapes. It's when you slice bread, when you pour out some tea. It comes from a broom, from a shopping bag, from peeling new potatoes, from a drop of blood from the prick of a needle when making panties for a child, or sewing a button on a husband's burial shirt. Comes out of toil, out of care, out of immense fatigue in the evening, out of a tear wiped away, out of a prayer broken off in mid-word by sleep. It's not from the grand, but from every tiny thing that it grows enormous, as if someone was building eternity as a swallow its nest out of clumps of moments.
That is gorgeous.
Wow. That's wonderful. That is wonderful. Talk about making you see things.
Yeah.
Always everyday speech. No attempt, almost an aversion to getting poetic.
Yeah.
But
How
so
does it begin
often
again? How does it begin?
she says, it usually starts taking shape from one word. You know, from one word.
That's it.
Yeah. She just blows me
That is
away over and
beautiful.
over and over again.
Absolutely beautiful.
I knew I was going to read one of her poems tonight, and I was just fighting with myself. Well, which one? I mean, there's just so many wonderful poems that she's written.
So
And
now, is she a contemporary? Is she alive?
no, she was a Polish poet, and I wrote it down earlier, and how did I lose it? But so her first book came out in 59, and her last book came out posthumously in 89. So, and I know when I looked it up, she was 66 when she died. So she was 2 years younger than I am now. So she was around for 66 years. And she wrote a lot of children's books. She translated a lot. She was very much a translator. But she wrote these, and her husband was a more famous poet than she was. But he wasn't famous to me because I don't really know him.
Well, so did she write Did she write in English or not?
No, she wrote in Polish. Claire Kavanaugh translated the journals, and these poems are translated by, I'm gonna mess it up, Graznia Drabik and David Corzon.
Mm.
Well, that's a discovery. Thank you.
Yeah, send me the name, please.
Oh, and here, maybe people can see it this way too.
Oh, yes. That's great. Thanks for holding that up. I think I can plumb it.
This is what we need more of. We need more of the holding up of what people are doing now, because the applause when you're pushing up the grass is not as much fun.
Mhm.
I think you're most probably right. But I don't know.
Actually, no. Think of it this way. It's really just perfect. Because if you were to get famous while you're alive, it would take up all your time. She's being punished all the time for writing well. She
Oh,
gets
yeah.
all the time for writing well. But if you stay under the radar, you don't get punished. And then
Well, yeah, exactly.
you're good enough that you stuck around after your poems stuck
I
around
hadn't
after
thought of it quite that way.
Well, I used to say about teaching that it was one of the only professions I could think of where they let you start at the top. Because to me, the top was class with students. And then as people became veteran and got seen to be capable of more things, they got booted upstairs into administration. And that's just the walking death. So, but they let you, the first day they give you a room and they put people in it and they turn you loose. So that's
fun.
Yes. I mean, I did that for 25 years and I loved every day of it. And I do miss it, but now I'm able to do some other things. But now, why did I mention this? Oh, yes. It's the same thing with fame. They won't, the, the top of the exercise is doing the work, not receiving attention for it.
Yeah.
So you want to be able to do the work. You start getting a lot of attention, then it robs you of your time and your energy, and it takes you away from doing the good thing and forces you to do some less good thing.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't use that as an argument for obscurity, but there's something to be said for being left alone to do the good thing, which is the work.
The only thing that recognition gets for you is you get to wedge a few poems in where they won't be easily forgotten. That's what Frost said.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
wedge a few poems in where they won't easily be forgotten.
Like the heads of kids. Like
Yeah.
the head.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Just last year, I had somebody write me and say, I haven't seen you in 55 years, but I remember you as my best teacher.
Yeah.
Well, that was worth any number of degrees.
Yeah. I get those from time to time too. I mean, I keep in touch with a lot of my former students. But yeah, and whenever you get one of those, you know that one person, without knowing it, is speaking for many others that would say the same thing if given the opportunity. So I mean, I don't think there's anything phony about taking that on faith, that if you've had that impact on one person, you probably had it on more than one. You just don't have them walking in the room to remind you every day.
And it's much more pleasant to be told by the student than by somebody else.
Oh my, yes. Oh my, yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll have to talk sometime about your career teaching, because we both taught high school, right, for many years. So, and that was interesting. Well, after this just knockout poem, which you characterize very accurately as being made out of common speech and sort of being at the opposite end of the room from the sort of high-flying loftiness of what poetry is in the minds of many people. I'm going to read something by Yeats.
You know, I think I told you this, that the first, when you asked us to read our favorite poets, favorite poems, that is the first poem that came to mind for me, is that one.
It knocked me out when
I
I
love
first read it. I
I
said,
love
boy,
that.
this is for me. And well, I'll talk about it after. We'll see. I think I have it by heart. We will see. So this is the song of Wandering Angus.
Mm.
I went out to the hazelwood because the fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the floor, I went to blow the fire aflame. But something rustled on the floor, and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering in hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone, and kiss her lips, and take her hands, and walk among long dappled grass, and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun.
Ah,
You were daring. That was a daring thing to do, and you really
you
pulled it
done
off.
doed it.
You pulled it off. That's
I wanted to give you my best.
Beautiful reading.
Well, but so here's why that means so much to me. It I don't know which Francis Bacon said this, either Sir Francis Bacon or the artist Francis Bacon. I got it out of a book of quotes. But one of them said, it's the job of the poet always to deepen the mystery. And that's, to me, what happens in that poem. There's this, it takes you through so many transformations. It's a dream for an actor. It gives you a chance to do so many things. It's wonderful that way. But when I was young, I liked so much of the early poems of Yeats that were, composed of walking with the fairies.
You're a lyric.
Pardon?
You're a lyric.
Yes, but the other thing about Yeats that really I found very compelling was that as I got older, I discovered that the older he got, the better it was. I mean, right
yeah.
up to the last poem, he was kind of getting away from these nice, flimsier things and callower things into other stuff. Now, that isn't to say that there isn't a ton of just stuff I can't deal with. There are lots of poems that don't really speak to me. I didn't live through the Irish Rebellion. There are a lot of things that are not Irish in my soul.
Mhm.
But Boy, all those the later when you get into the 30s, once you navigate around the magical stuff to the down to earth stuff, I just love all of his later work, and he had a really profound effect on me, and he wasn't afraid to sort of beat the big drum in terms of the sound of the music of poetry,
Mhm.
And so I was powerfully affected by that, because as we know, if you hear Frost read his own work, for example, he almost underplays it to the point of deadpan. He's so not speaking with that lilt that people used to use in the early part of the 20th century and before, that now this is poetry and every line ends with something fraught with emotion. Frost kind of undercuts that, but Yeats, he's like gins it up, when he wants to.
And
So,
both things work. Both of those techniques work.
oh, of
Because
course, well, here's the thing about technique. Any technique works if you make it work. There's no technique. Technique doesn't. You get no credit for it. You have to make it work. If you make it work, that's where the credit comes from. What the actual technique itself is that's kind of why I don't get too hung up on form so much. But yeah, and the other thing, and I come at this as a musician, particularly as a jazz musician, as an improviser, and that is that in the final analysis, when you spend your whole life working, every person develops her or his own personal technique. It's not like anybody else. It works for them. It would probably not work for anyone else. And that's what technique is for. You get to the point where the thing that you're doing, nobody else could do. And that's where you want to get to. So anyway, I'm babbling, but I love that poem. And that's one of the earlier ones that
Yeah,
still
that's what's funny
grabs me.
about it. What's funny about that is that, you put on a mask to read it just now,
yeah.
but he put on a mask to write it. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands. Not
Yes,
very old. He
No, he
must be about
never
what,
did that.
22 or something? He's
right.
such a young man. It's such a young man's poem.
Yes.
And
Yeah, but he knew how to do it.
it works, yeah.
And also, that philosopher, which one was he? I forgot, said poets are liars, and we are liars. Thank goodness.
Yes. Sure.
Yeah. We'd be
Well, you
lost.
got.
We'd be lost if we weren't.
Yeah, you got to be. Yeah. It's the option.
Because what poetry does is to say yes and no at the same time. And in order to do that, you have to be a very skillful liar.
Yes. Yeah, that's well put. Yeah. So anyway, that's um,
Wonderful.
I can't.
Mhm.
That's
Well,
one I
I'm
wish I
glad
could have
didn't.
written that. I wish I could have written that. I don't
I
feel that
know.
way all that often, but but that's one case where I do feel that way. But okay, so that's it for round two. Um, shall we begin round three?
Absolutely.
So now, this is when we're going to read poems by one another.
Yes.
And I know that he's going to read one of mine.
I know
I
that.
am.
So therefore, you should read
I want to read one of his.
one of his, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Oh,
There it goes.
and then I will read one of yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next time around, she'll read one of yours,
Right.
and
Okay.
I'll read one of hers.
Okay. No, that's not it. That's not the one I want. No, I want 49. Here we go. His daemon tells it like it is. And the reason I loved this poem immediately is that it thinks about something that I think about a lot. What is the relationship between my poetry and me?
Mhm.
Is it making me or am I making it?
Yeah.
Are we fighting or are we making love?
Yeah.
What does actually is there any relationship at all? Is the instinct to write, is the drive to write simply something that's planted in the child in the womb and has nothing to do with the rest of its life? Or is it something that the person with experience pulls in through the experience? I really have never figured that out.
Yeah. I think it's a wonderful tension. I mean, you don't want to be the boss of the poem altogether.
No, but I don't want the boss to be, I don't want the poem to be the boss of me either. I would like to have some share in this job, but I'm not sure I do. This is called His Daemon Tells It Like It Is. I don't, and it's the daemon speaking, of course. I don't concern myself much with the human who is my instrument. I interrupt his days with words and music, lend a sense of form, and he forgets to eat and sleep. He thinks that he and I are one, believes he needs acknowledgement at most, at least attention, for the works I put through him and put him through. Although he is my thrall, he wants to be loved just as though he acted on his own. It matters to him that he gets what he deserves and doesn't suffer. In the greater scheme, it's not important. This poem, I can visualize one of my poems saying, she's an old lady, she doesn't know very much.
What does she
She
think?
thinks she's writing this.
It's so true.
But I just love it because this daemon is so self-centered and so assured.
It's like,
He has no doubts about his own skills and his own place in the world.
yeah.
You can go to hell as far as he's concerned.
Yeah. It's like a pen, yours pen.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
he is my thrall, my servant.
Yeah,
And that's a really lowly word for servant.
Yeah.
For thrall. He's the one who does stuff that is filthy in the kitchen.
And you know what? I love the way that you read the last line. It's like you were going to drop the book. In the greater scheme, it's not important.
You read it really, really well. And I have to say, I think that's an example of a poem of mine that most likely only another poet would stop to think very much about.
Oh, please, I wanted to have written this poem right away.
Well, but so that's what I'm saying. Well, who writes it's not that important.
Right.
As long as it gets out. I have a kind of a lingering theory that surfaces in some of my work from time to time, that a whole other way to look at reality is that emotions are really flitting around the world all the time, in charge of everything, just looking for people to come out through.
Yes, it's like a tube, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're really what's going on, and we're just tricked into thinking that we're in charge of ourselves, but really, it's like we're radio sets, and we get tuned into a particular channel, and here comes this thing.
Somebody
and it's
a big blowhard. They have to find that.
I would love to read him my story,
Oh, I know.
because that's exactly,
Mhm.
I mean, we've been speaking to one another all this time without knowing it.
Which story is this?
One in
It's the
that
one
little
that's in here
book,
in
right?
this little black
Oh, the
book.
one that's in my bookcase. Yes,
Yeah.
That's right.
Right.
You didn't know it was yours, but there it is.
apparently not. So there you go. It's a little bit of a second cousin concept to the Borges story about the duel that that happens like in the 19th century, and then the knives go into a case and they're looked at, and then years later other people come in and they break into the case and they use the knives to kill each other. And the end of the story, Borges says, it was the knives that knew how to fight.
Mm.
Yeah, that's right. It's the same concept. It's your tools are making you.
Mm.
Yes.
Your tools
Yeah.
are making you.
Yeah. So these knives were in this case all this time, but they lacked use. They needed to find somebody to put them to work.
That's right. They were bored. They were bored in there.
Apparently. Well, thank you for choosing that, and you really read it just superbly.
No, you can't ruin that poem.
Mhm.
Well, I don't know. I've never heard anybody else read it. That's one of the form of enjoyment that I'm getting out of this encounter is to hear other people read things that I've read to myself for many years. In the case of reading other poems, and then having us do each other's. I think I mentioned it to you in an email that for me it's similar to having another singer sing one of my songs. And I've had that happen, not all that often, but a number of times, and I've had some of them recorded. And it's always very interesting because, to go back to my comment about technique, vocal phrasing is very personal. And so when another person sings my lyric, she or he does things with it that I wouldn't do. And it's very interesting to hear that, because if they're good, it shows you that the thing that you made can work in all these different ways. They don't rely on you to be their agent. So, I mean, then again, it comes around. The song is just finding somebody to come out of.
You're a handy instrument.
Yes, yes. You're at hand. Yes. So, wow. Well, I couldn't wish for a better reading of that poem. Thank you. And nobody else would bother to read it. That's kind of my take on it. It's like, what the hell is this about? If you're not used to wrestling with yourself as a creator, it wouldn't really mean much.
No.
So you were the right person. Thank you.
Thank you for writing.
Okay, so that means you, Alf, are up.
I'm going to read one by Rhina.
Excellent.
And her poem that I'm going to read is called Clara, My Unconceived.
Yes.
Clara, my unconceived, my childhood's last and never daughter, hostage from the past. What grief has so disarmed you that both hands have dropped inert? I find two rubber bands, a crochet hook, carefully thread them through holes that shed scant light on the heart of you. Arm you again to deal with a hard world. A better mother would have kept you curled, minutely shod and stockinged, prim in white. This auburn tangle says all is not right, as do your naked toes and faded dress. We have not stayed in touch, and I confess the fault is mine, who earlier loved you so, more than half of this century ago. I did not know your not quite father then, who froze in foxholes in the deep Ardennes, while I did long division, learned to cook and worked on granny squares with this same hook. When I named you, I had not chosen other names for your first and second brother, who would replace you and absorb my care, thereafter focused on their skin and hair, their appetites and baths and morning cries. Poor Clara, from whose blue, unblinking eyes I cannot hide the depth of my defection. What issues you bring up for introspection? Would we, this side of birth, have done our nails together? Shopped the malls for summer sales, trying on things we never meant to buy? Would you have whispered stories of this guy and that, of what was said with words and looks? Would we have shared our work and traded books? What's to be done with loves that keep themselves safe, out of time, like you, on dusty shelves? Permanent in your absence, by those streams we will not ford again except in dreams. You lie here in my hand, unformed but whole, like Sister Ada's rendering of the soul, whose vacancy, she said, was all its task. She didn't tell us why. We didn't ask. The doll is such a doll until it suddenly is something else at the end of the poem. And you know, I never can quite, if I were to have to, explicate this poem, I wouldn't be able to do it. I really wouldn't be able to do it. I love what happens there at the end. But I don't feel like I want to get the meaning out of that poem. And I just like that poem. You want to know do you notice that it's all in couplets? You would never guess that that poem is in couplets. There's no, it doesn't announce itself like an Alexander Pope poem, but it's just
Right.
like an Alexander Pope poem. And then what she even does is this. In the if the first stanza is seven lines. So that means the stanza break comes in the middle of a rhyme couplet. And then of course, then when she gets to the next two, the first two stanzas are like that with seven. She does nine on the next ones, so it happens again. She's always breaking up the things, and only in that last one that has eight to do all of the couplets, they arrange themselves.
Huh.
So, yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I don't what does it mean? I don't know. I I just think it's always been one of my favorite poems by Rhina. And I
Thank you.
and I don't I don't quite I don't know quite what's happening. I just like what's happening.
Well, you didn't play with dolls, did you?
Well, I didn't do any of that. I do more of that now with the two little granddaughters.
Oh, so nice.
Well, for me, and this is a personal response because my mother wanted very much, well, first of all, she wanted to have more children than just me. Um, and that was not to be given to her. But more specifically, she really wanted to have a daughter. And I heard for most of the latter part of her life and the whole first part of my life, um, her she didn't quite go through this exercise of imagining what life would have been like if she'd had a daughter instead of a son, or a daughter in addition to a son, but a daughter, somebody she could teach things to and somehow identify with. Um, so through the whole middle part of that poem, that's a lot of what comes through to me is the questioning. What would it have been like? Would we have gone to the malls? Would we have bought things? Um, and in I kind of hear this because you had sons. You do have sons.
I have 3 sons.
So I don't know that whether you wanted ever to have a daughter.
I did, but I was also afraid. I was afraid to have a daughter because my mother had been very, very, very strict with me. Very strict. And there were things that were not allowed even to be discussed. And I was
Really.
afraid that I would bring up a daughter in the same way, which I would not have wanted to do.
So you felt that you had a freer hand with sons
Oh,
because you did not have a brother.
boys are wonderful. Boys are wonderful. And they were my best friends when they were growing up, and they still are really. Um, and we used to lie on the floor on our stomachs and watch Captain Kangaroo. And they told me everything, and I told them almost everything.
Ah,
So they were really friends, and I was a young mother. I was a very young mother. So we kind of horsed around a lot, and we still do, and I can use dreadful language in front of them, and they don't care, and neither do I.
We won't
so
sing.
so although you say that you were afraid of having a daughter,
Yes, I was.
did you at the same time dream about what it could be like, as
Yes,
you do in the poem?
yes, I did. I did. I was divided on that. I would have liked a girl, but I don't know if I would have brought up a girl the way I wanted to bring up anybody. I brought up the kids, the boys, just right, just right. I told them that's what my mother did not tell me. You are gorgeous guys. I wanted them to be spoiled rotten, and they are.
Well, surely you could have done the same thing with a daughter, though, couldn't you? No. Why not?
Because
I mean,
I had been taught that girls had to be modest, and it was a different kind of. It's a Dominican way to bring up children. You tell boys anything they want to hear, but you tell girls what they need to be modest and a little bit behind the times.
interesting. But you,
You
but you
know,
were
even
also
even when I when they had a Channel 2 ran a show on Julia Alvarez
Oh yeah, I
recently,
know. I
and
heard.
she was talking the same way.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
sure. Of course. We're all a little bit afraid of having daughters because we want to treat them the same way we treat our sons because we adore them the same way. But you're not doing them a favor according to Dominican values, to that Hispanic values. You're supposed to make them modest and with their hands behind their backs.
wow.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like your personal agenda.
No, because I learned to be
Somehow.
wicked. I learned to be wicked,
yeah,
and it
yeah.
was very hard to learn.
In that on that program, I was always thinking of you because she was talking that way. She had to learn to be
Oh yeah,
wicked, and
oh
I think she did a pretty good
she did a
job.
good
You
job.
guys did. You guys learn quick.
Well, I never. It took me until my 40s.
Mm.
Wow.
Well, Alfred was
But
the one who said, "What are you talking about? You're beautiful." I said, "No, I'm not." He said, "Yes, you are," and he talked me into it. I said, "You know what? I'm no homelier than anybody else. I look just like anybody else," and that was a relief.
wow.
But that's traditional. My mother was a beauty. And her mother, my grandmother, told her that she was not.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I have to believe, though, if you had a daughter, you would have wrestled with this background that you had been told to instill, but you wouldn't have just passed it along without a fight, and you probably would have found your own way to do what you insisted and knew in your heart was the right thing to do.
I have by now. I have by now.
Yeah.
I understand how American girls grow up. And I don't know if I could have done it when I was in my 20s when I had children,
Mm.
but I sure would have loved to.
Interesting. Well, not having a daughter was one of the things that my mother continually harped on, that she did not blame on me. This is just looking forward a little bit into the evening. This is the woman who said about the black pearls that my father should have saved them, even though he didn't know her yet. She found a way to blame him for losing them.
It's so great.
I don't want to give that away, but you understand what I'm saying.
Oh, I understand it perfectly.